What does it mean to live a life of rootedness? This is the theme in our Soul Matters groups this month at the church and in most of our services. What does it mean to live a life of rootedness? And when I think about rootedness, I think about what connects us most deeply to our living, to our understandings of ourselves as at home in the world, and even in our aloneness, to our feeling that we matter and that we belong. I think about the circumstances and the choices of generations past that have preceded our arrival in the world and left us with the unique realities into which and out of which we grow. How none of us had a say in any of that. None of us chooses our families or the places or the culture or the religious outlook or the educational expectations or the political predispositions or the economic circumstances or the multi-generational family emotional process into which we have been born. If we did, I'm thinking we would probably lose much of the human diversity of our world, perhaps much of the inequity and the injustice too. Were options offered, would humans choose to arrive to circumstances where hunger or homelessness is an everyday reality, or where war is ever present, or where the inherited pigment of skin will lead to significant disadvantages and discrimination, or where the religious outlook would instill constant inhibition and fear, or where the immediate family history is haunted by dysfunction or abuse? Offered the opportunity to choose without the influence of our families of origin and the circumstances out of which they have grown, wouldn't all of us select love and safety and shelter and peace? But we don't get a say in the roots we inherit even as they stretch beneath the surface of our daily lives and contain within them countless stories of danger and survival and elation and heartbreak that go back long into our family's history, even back to the very beginning of human history itself, informing our living in ways we can understand and ways perhaps we cannot. No matter if we spend a lifetime tracing what we can learn about our family's branches of these roots, or if we do all we can to ignore or even abandon our roots, they will remain there all the same, connecting us to the past and, in a sense, to each other. They are the roots that instill in us our first notions of what family is, what safety is, what possibility is, even what the future might be. They are the roots that reveal to us our first and perhaps most enduring understandings of home. Understandings that influence in ways both obvious and subtle the kind of home we may create for ourselves and for the generations that will follow. Some of these roots are helpful to us in that they simplify our options. They help us make sense of what can be an unwieldy and overwhelming life. These roots are the places where we can return when our branching out has left us feeling adrift. Sometimes these roots can hold us down, too, effectively eliminating from our lives the possibility of growth, keeping us from becoming the people we are yearning to be. These kind of roots are not the roots we have chosen. They are the roots that we could say have chosen us. So what about the roots that we can choose? What about the commitments that we can make to our lives and to the people around us, the commitments that are within our reach? Well, I've been thinking this week about these roots of choice in my own life, the times when the sudden spark of revelation or the long unfolding of understanding has led me to branch out from my inherited roots into new growth, new possibility. Troubling though that branching out might have been, might still be. Poet David Whyte captures the gift and the terror of the revelation that enables us to branch out beyond our inherited roots. He writes, "Revelation must be terrible, with no time left to say goodbye. Revelation must be terrible, with no time left to say goodbye. Imagine that moment, staring at the still waters with only the brief tremor of your body to say, you are leaving everything and everyone you know behind. One of my most terrible times of revelation came to fruition in a moment in church. But truly, it was more of the long unfolding kind. I was raised in the Protestant tradition of my mother and her mother's mother, so I was expected to go to church on Sunday mornings, to sit in the pews, to restrain myself from making a scene with my adolescent impatience. To pass the time, I would draw on the orders of service and the offering envelopes, daydreaming about the people around me. I figured that I would one day become interested in what was happening in those services, like the adults around me seemed to be, but beyond the ritual singing and speaking, which I liked, I saw my participation mostly as a means to the donuts my mother would reward us with afterwards. Still, I loved the people I knew in the church. I saw them as kind and gentle. They always had a smile and a soft word for me. The minister was a man with a friendly twinkle in his eye, a wry way of interacting that I found intriguing and comfortable. When we saw him around town, say at the local bank or the bowling alley, it was kind of like seeing a superhero out of costume. I had my suspicions that, despite the prominent role he played on Sundays, he was actually just like us, maybe even just like me, albeit an older version. Church and the people there felt like home to me. A home I did not choose myself, but a home for which I had affection and respect. Well, over time, I began to pay more attention to what I was hearing and saying in those services. The spoken creeds were no longer just words we were reciting together. They were words that actually meant something, words that I was starting to question. Not with animosity, more with wonder, with confusion. Hell, the Holy Ghost, the Virgin Mary, judging the quick and the dead. Lots for a developing mind to ponder in those words. What does it mean when I say these things? I asked my mother as we stood side by side doing dishes one night after supper, a time when we often discussed the big questions. I don't think I believe that stuff, I told her. Maybe she had wrestled with some of the same doubts. I'll bet she had, as she did not choose to shame me in that moment or to suggest that I'd better get my understanding straight if I hoped for eternal life. She was religious, but thankfully not that kind of religious. No, all I remember her saying is that religion is not about always understanding. It is about trying to understand. She said it is about trying to understand. I like that. I still do. Religion is about trying to understand. What I was beginning to understand at the time, however, was that I shouldn't be participating in the portions of the service that troubled me because I didn't think they were true, or at least I couldn't convince myself they were true, and no amount of trying to understand was going to change that. My concerns were serious. They were heartfelt. And even with the non-judgmental love of my mom as I wrestled with it all, they were a little scary. But I pressed on, finding some courage in my dedication to my own emerging perspective and to claim my voice. And so I resolved to live with more integrity at church. I would still go as my parents expected, but I would withhold from saying and doing things I didn't believe. I liked to sing the hymns, so I didn't stop singing, the chance to make music being more important to me than theological precision. But I did choose to cut out during the unison creeds when words were spoken that didn't fit for me. The first few times I chose not to speak when everyone else did felt odd, kind of rebellious, but strangely empowering too. And then came a week when the congregation shared a communion. The tradition was to pass trays with little squares of bread, everyone taking a piece, waiting to put it into their mouths at the same time. Well, the bread came and went, and I declined to participate. So far, so good. Next, trays with tiny glasses of grape juice were passed, and I again refused. And then the words were said, and the people in the pews in unison drank the juice, their heads going back as if the room had been picked up and tipped to an angle for a moment and then back. My head stayed still. And this is where the revelation of my own understanding became terrible. When there was no time left to say goodbye. When I was leaving everything and everyone I knew behind. My choice to abandon the rituals and the understandings of my clan in that moment felt like a leap into nothingness, which I guess it was, because I was leaving behind what I had known for the unknown. It felt as though I had ripped myself from the roots that had previously offered me a sense of identity, even in my confusion, in my lack of belief. My commitment to authenticity required that I refuse the communion, but the disorientation I experienced as I let go of my culture was painful and real. I instantly wept. My mom held my hand, sensing the leap that I had taken, perhaps wanting to hold on to her son as I went bounding into an adulthood of my own choosing. Not everyone gets to be held when taking these kinds of leaps, but I did. Nevertheless, it was terrible. Terrible all the same. Another troubling time of revelation and of choice arose out of my first romance, a several-year relationship with a high school classmate. My family roots did not suggest to me that a high school girlfriend should necessarily become a life partner, but the roots my girlfriend inherited did, and so our romance headed quickly toward our own kind of rootedness to each other. Eager to please and to be loved, I reciprocated her expectations, and together we would sit in restaurants and walk through area parks, planning our future together, right down to the habits we would have as a married couple, the children we would raise, and the kind of lives our emerging family would lead, lives of safety and predictability and, in many ways, comfort. But somewhere on the road to our prematurely planned wedded bliss, I began to see that these were not the roots I would choose, at least not yet. And so, through fits and starts and arguments and tears and all kinds of adolescent dysfunction, no doubt greatly influenced by the emotional patterns of my family of origin and hers too, I finally found the words to articulate to myself and to her a desire for a different storyline, a different set of roots. This was a terrible time. I didn't want to hurt this person I loved. I didn't want to disappoint her expectations, but I didn't know how to inhabit the future I envisioned without severing myself from the roots we had created together. It was not easy to select loneliness over safety, to point myself toward the unknown rather than the sure thing, to choose roots that were more a vision than a reality, but I did. And it was one of the most challenging and despair-filled times of my life, honestly, both in my choice and in the immediate aftermath of what that choice had brought. But even in my despair, I knew that it had been my right to choose, and that I had chosen the very best that I could. Looking back now, I'm sure she and I would both agree that we ended up in circumstances more befitting the lives we desired than if we had stayed together. But as any of you who have made similar choices can attest, the transition to new life is often brutal and bleak. More from David White. Being far from home is hard. Being far from home is hard, but you know, at least we are all exiled together. When you open your eyes to the world, when you open your eyes to the world, you are on your own for the first time. No one is even interested in saving you now. No one is even interested in saving you now. Another story of revelation and of choice. More terrible in the lead up than in the moment of discovery of the roots I should accept. It involves a former member of this church, Earl Fitz. Last week's Festival of Remembrance service brought Fitz to mind, as it always has since he died in 2009. When I was new in ministry, you see, I leaned on Fitz a bit, grateful to visit with him now and then, to receive the benefit of his many years of experience as a psychiatrist and a counselor. Good chunks of our visits during this time would be spent considering my relationship to my father, with whom I'd been having some challenges at the time that left me disappointed and confused and sometimes guilt-ridden over my lack of interest in being the primary communicator in our relationship. You know, the one that always makes the calls, the one that asks all the questions, the one that follows up. I was getting tired of that. It was a relationship that I felt was being dominated by my dad's own self-involvement. Well, Fitz must have grown tired of this storyline, or maybe he figured he needed to rattle my cage a bit. Whatever his motivation, I'll never forget his counsel to me. I was bemoaning my father's lack of whatever it was he was lacking in that month. And Fitz offered in his characteristic voice a spark of revelation. "Well, Mark," he said, "did you ever stop to think that maybe he's just an ass?" What? He slowed down, carefully enunciating every word. "Maybe he's just an ass." I laughed with relief. With a simple sentence, Fitz had reminded me that I didn't have to choose to be responsible for my father's emotions, or even for our relationship, at least not to the extent that I should forget that my father, too, was playing a role in that relationship. Now, I don't think my dad is an ass, by the way. But I do remind myself often that the quality of my relationship with him and with others I sometimes find difficult does not rest solely on my shoulders. I don't have to root myself in every challenging relationship I encounter. I can choose to see things in a more self-differentiated way. I can choose routes that do not demand that I martyr myself to seek the happiness of others. Happiness I cannot and will not control, no matter how much I may try. David White once more. The world steps in. The world steps in to test the calm fluidity of your body from moment to moment, as if you were meant to be exactly where you are, as if you were meant to be exactly where you are. As if, like the dark branch of a desert river, you could flow on without a speck of guilt, and everything, everywhere, would still be just as it should be. One more story of revelation and the roots I have chosen. This one arrived as a result of a different kind of loneliness than an abandoned love or a difficult relationship with my dad. It's a foundational story of choice in my life, a story I tell a lot here as it involves my call to this religion that we share. From that time of refusing communion in the church of my childhood through my mid-20s, I had chosen routes that did not include religious community. My need for authenticity in matters of the spirit and the heart did not fit with the dictates of the church as I knew them, so I mostly stayed away. When friends or family would bring me to a service, I would judge the proceedings as though I were a health inspector on the lookout for tainted meat, as if to prove to myself that my choice all those years ago had not only been right, but righteous. Still being in these houses of worship had reminded me of pleasant memories of the kind and gentle people I had known in the churches of my youth. I had begun to sense that having relationships with people outside of my immediate circle of like-minded and like-aged friends could be good for me. I was starting to feel a need to branch out, to maybe find some new roots. So I started looking into religions that might better intersect with my own need to try to understand. Upon finding Unitarian Universalism, a religion to which a friend had pointed me back in college, I instantly found what I had longed for. It wasn't perfect, but I found a religion in which ethical considerations are more important than theological distinctions. A religion where direct experience and ongoing revelation is expected, encouraged, honored. A religion where people, amidst their differences, covenant, promise to leave space for each other, where people in both skilled and clumsy ways try to understand this life that we share without expecting we all should come to the same conclusions. I found a religion rooted in a heretical history of choice, of individual choice, rooted in acknowledging the past but not being restricted to it, rooted in distilling what has come before as a means to build together what might still be. In Unitarian Universalism, I had found the very roots I had yearned for all those years ago, even if I couldn't have said it at the time. To be here, you see, has been like coming home to me. Coming home to a place I had never fully been. A home I am still discovering and learning how to inhabit through each encounter and possibility for greater understanding it offers. A place where my revelations will continue, terrible though they may be. A place where my spirit can reach out to that which I don't yet understand, and yet where I am never fully removed from the on-the-ground reality of our shared lives. A place with roots I have chosen and have claimed, roots I want to share with others who are seeking a home for their own exploration and attempts to understand. Roots that remind me of the gifts and the blessings of this life that we share. This life, this beautiful, complicated, confounding life, this bright home in which we live, where we ask our friends to come, where we want to love all the things it has taken us so long to learn to love. This life, this religion, which continues to teach me, and maybe you too, that there is no house like the house of belonging. There is no house like the house of belonging. And there are no roots like the ones that we choose. There are no roots like the ones that we choose.